11:42 at night. My phone buzzed. A group text from my father, we've agreed. Ryan and Vanessa will move into the house. You should take a break. Seconds later, my mother reacted with a little red heart. The room shrank to a pin. I scrolled my receipts like a ledger, taxes, roof utilities, the quiet money that kept the lights alive. Line after line, I saw it clearly I wasn't a daughter here. I was an account they'd closed. Have you ever been cut off by the people you helped most? Tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just opened my laptop. The glow of the screen was cold and exact, perfect for what came next. Mortgage canceled, property insurance canceled, electric and water autopay canceled. Each click felt like slicing a cord I'd been strangled by for years. By midnight, their lifeline was gone. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical, like balancing a spreadsheet. Every transaction, a revelation. I'd been the silent investor in their version of family, and tonight I was cashing out. When the last cancellation confirmation pinged my inbox, I leaned back and stared at the empty room. My apartment smelled like coffee and unfinished paint. My heart felt like glass, but clear, finally see-through. The next morning, sunlight broke through blinds I hadn't yet hung. I stuffed a duffel with the essentials, laptop, passport, 3 clean shirts, and the plant that somehow survived my chaos. I loaded it all into the car. The drive downtown was quiet, no calls from them yet. Maybe they were sleeping in the house I'd paid to keep warm. Maybe they'd wake up to discover how it actually stayed that way. The new apartment was small, 1-bedroom, high ceilings, quiet enough to hear myself think. I set the plant by the window and watched light scatter across the hardwood. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was mine. Sophia showed up that afternoon, no warning, carrying coffee and sarcasm in equal measure. You look like you just staged a heist, she said. Maybe I did, I answered. Except the only thing I stole back was myself. She laughed, then studied me. You sure you're okay? I'm not broken, I said. I'm just reorganizing the books. We sat on the floor surrounded by boxes. My hands shook slightly as I took the coffee. The betrayal still burned, but under it was something sharper clarity. I always thought loyalty was a virtue, I said. Turns out it's only that when it's mutual. Sophia nodded. So what now? I rebuild, I told her, from the ground up. No unpaid debts, no invisible labor. Just structure that stands. She smiled, slow and proud. You always were better at architecture than emotion. Yeah, I said, half smiling back. But maybe this time I'll design both right. The day faded into quiet. I unpacked 1 box books, a framed degree, the evidence of years I'd tried to justify. Every item I set down was a declaration. I don't owe them anymore. Outside the city hummed anonymous, indifferent, honest. I stood by the window, coffee cooling in my hand, and watched the light shift. For the first time in years, no one depended on me, and the silence felt like peace. I used to think love was built like a house-layered patient, unshakable, if you just kept patching the cracks. But when I look back, all I see is scaffolding, I built alone. After moving out, the nights hit differently. Quiet can be louder than shouting. Every creak sounded like the past asking for rent. I'd open my laptop just to remind myself what I'd already paid for the new roof, the heating system, the water bills stacked like proof of loyalty. My father used to say, "You're the reliable one, Aaron." I can always count on you. I thought it was pride. Now I know it was permission to drain me dry. Ryan would come by empty-handed and full of excuses. Every investment he made dissolved faster than the last. An app that never launched a food truck, that never drove a crypto phase, that ended with tears and a new loan in my name. And still, Dad called him a visionary. When I fixed a broken pipe at 2 in the morning, no one noticed. When Ryan bought a new smartwatch, they celebrated like he'd cured poverty. The memory that hurts the most isn't an argument, it's a whisper. Mom leaning over the sink after dinner saying softly, "You're so strong, honey. Not everyone's meant to shine. Some of us are meant to hold things together." I nodded back then, proud to be the glue. I didn't realize glue gets used up. Years of that. My salary funneled into keeping their world upright. I was the foundation beneath their collapsing walls. I told myself that's what family meant. It wasn't love, it was logistics. There's a kind of fatigue that doesn't sleep off. It settles in your bones like concrete. You learn to mistake survival for virtue exhaustion, for proof that you matter. That's the invisible chain of the survivor, how caretakers convince themselves that suffering is purpose. I wore that chain for so long it felt like jewelry. Every sacrifice looked noble until the night they cut me loose. Now, when I replay it, I can almost admire the symmetry. Years of carrying them, and in the end, they set me free by erasing me. I didn't lose a family. I closed an account that had been overdrawn for too long. I scroll through old photos, sometimes the family in front of the house, Dad smiling, Ryan pretending to help paint the porch, Mom clutching her pearls like she built the walls herself. I used to see love in that picture. Now I see a project I financed without ever signing the blueprints. It's strange how clarity feels like oxygen after you've lived on smoke. I don't feel angry anymore. I just understand. They didn't mean to destroy me. They simply assumed I'd never leave. Because I always stayed. I always paid. I always fixed. Not anymore. The house still stands because I built it. But it's no longer mine, and that's the lesson that finally made sense. A week later, my phone lit up with notifications I hadn't asked for. Vanessa's face filled my screen, a filtered smile, her hand resting on the banister I'd installed. The caption read, "Our dream home." My thumb froze mid-scroll. Our she'd written like I'd never existed. The post had hundreds of likes. Friends, neighbors, people who didn't know a single truth behind those glossy emojis. Ryan's comment sat right beneath it, finally ours. I closed the app before I threw the phone. But the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was humiliation sharpening into precision. I drafted an email, polite, measured, factual. Please confirm repayment of the renovation balance within 30 days. I attached the receipts. I even said thank you at the end. It felt ridiculous, like apologizing for bleeding. Hours later, Ryan replied, "You're overreacting, Aaron. It's family, not business. Don't turn this into drama." I stared at the words. Family, not business. That line had kept me trapped for years. It was their magic trick turning accountability into guilt. Then came Dad's post on Facebook. Some people forget who raised them. Underneath, Mom commented with a praying hands emoji. I didn't cry. I didn't call. I sat there watching the pattern unfold like a blueprint I'd already memorized. That night, Sophia stopped by. She dropped her bag on my counter and poured herself tea like she lived there. "You saw the post, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded. "Want me to comment something brutal?" "No," I said. "Let them talk." She studied me for a moment. "You're too calm." "I'm done negotiating with ghosts," I said. "Next time they want my attention, they can read a legal notice." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "You're serious." I met her eyes. "I'm done playing fair." She smiled. "Good. Maybe it's time they pay for what you built." After she left, I opened my laptop again. No tears this time, no hesitation, just data evidence timestamps. I gathered every document, every email trail, every transfer I'd made for them. My fingers moved fast like they finally had purpose. As I scrolled through folders labeled repairs and utilities, I realized something new. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. They'd built a house of mirrors, shiny, deceptive, full of reflections that made them look righteous. But mirrors can't hold weight. They shatter when you lean on them. And I was done being their reflection. So I pressed print. The hum of the printer was steady, methodical, almost soothing. When the last page slid out, I stacked the evidence neatly and sealed it in an envelope. Tomorrow they'd get my final gift, an invoice written in truth. The next morning, the air had that sterile chill that always follows a decision. I carried the envelope to Lena's office downtown, a glass cube that smelled like ink and coffee and calm destruction. Lena didn't waste words. "So, you're ready to formalize this?" "Ready," I said. My voice sounded like a verdict. We sat across her desk while she scrolled through the files I'd gathered. Her pen moved quickly, crisp clicks echoing in the room. "We'll send a formal notice of repayment," she said. "Keep it factual, emotionless, clear." "That's my language," I said. By the time the draft was done, it read like a scalpel. 30 days to repay $400,000 in documented expenses. Failure to respond will result in legal escalation. No accusations, no anger. Just precision. When the email went out, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief alignment. I was no longer the problem solver, I was the reckoning. 2 days later, Vanessa replied through her firm's letterhead. I knew it was her because it was too performative to come from anyone else. Our client denies all claims. Any materials used were gifted. Furthermore, Aaron Matthews is under investigation for unauthorized use of proprietary design templates. I read it twice slowly. She'd flipped the script, turning theft into projection. It was almost elegant in its audacity. I forwarded it to Lena. "Classic deflection," she said. "She's trying to make you doubt the ground you stand on." "That's familiar," I said. "It's the family's favorite trick." Lena looked at me curious. I told her about the pattern, how love had always come packaged with debt, how loyalty was a leash dressed as virtue. She nodded, then leaned back in her chair. They think it's love, Aaron, she said quietly. It's control. That's the trap of normalized cruelty. It hides behind words like duty and tradition. You were trained to keep them safe. Now you're learning to keep yourself. Her words hit harder than the legal threat. For years, I'd mistaken their exploitation for affection, their silence for peace. I thought being the reliable one made me valuable. I didn't realize it just made me convenient. I walked home in the rain, the city flickering in reflections across the pavement. Every drop sounded like punctuation to a truth I'd ignored too long. That night I sat by my window and wrote a list, not of payments, but of patterns, things I'd forgiven, boundaries I'd erased, apologies I'd made for simply existing. By the end, the page looked like evidence in a case I was finally winning. I folded the list into my notebook, like a contract between who I'd been and who I was becoming. Vanessa's accusation didn't scare me, it clarified the battlefield. She'd chosen manipulation, I'd chosen math, and math doesn't lie. Tomorrow I'd start tracing every transaction they'd ever touched. If this was going to be war, I'd fight with precision, not emotion. This wasn't family drama anymore. It was data. It was structure. It was the sound of lines being drawn finally, irrevocably straight. 2 weeks later, Lena called. Her voice had that tight, careful tone that lawyers use when a bomb is about to drop. Aaron, we found something, she said. You'd better sit down. I didn't. I stood by the window watching the rain streak across the glass like data lines. What is it? There's a loan in your name, she said. A green housing expansion, $500,000, signed with your architectural seal. For a second, the world thinned out. Only the sound of her voice remained precise and terrible. My seal, I repeated. Yes, she said. It's on every document. I stared at my desk where the actual seal sat cold metal catching light. My mind began filing, cross-checking, calculating. It wasn't a mistake. It was design. By nightfall, I was in my car driving toward Maple Heights. The house rose like a stranger against the storm scaffolding, covering its front piles of lumber stacked in the driveway. When I walked in, the air smelled like wet paint and fraud. 2 men in suits stood by the dining table with blueprints spread out the kind I'd recognize anywhere. My blueprints. Vanessa turned, still smiling. Aaron, she said, as if she'd invited me to brunch. Perfect timing. What is this? I asked. She gestured at the plans. Investors. We're expanding the property. You should be proud. It's your design. My signature's forged, I said. She shrugged. You always wanted credit. Now you've got it. The men exchanged looks. One cleared his throat. Is there a problem? Yes, I said. Several. I took out my phone and started recording. Vanessa's smile didn't falter. She leaned closer. You think this scares me. You built your whole life cleaning up other people's messes. Go ahead, fix this too. Her perfume was sharp, synthetic, the smell of confidence bought on credit. I looked at her and felt nothing but clarity. When I left, the rain had stopped. The streetlights glared on puddles like open eyes. My phone was full of evidence. My heart felt light, but not in a good way, like a rope finally snapped. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over one thought all my life. I'd mistaken obligation for love. I thought being needed meant being valued. But it was never love, it was leverage. The oldest debt of all. I sat at my desk and opened a new folder, the forged blueprint. I uploaded every recording, every document, every date-stamped photo. Line by line, I watched the structure of their lies take shape. It was almost poetic. The family home they'd worshipped had become a crime scene, the altar where their faith and easy money finally devoured them. And this time I wasn't the savior. I was the witness. The next day broke with that false calm that always comes before collapse. By noon, Lena called again. They're moving fast, she said. Investigators are coordinating with the bank. Your signature was used to secure the second mortgage. They're sending agents to the property tonight. I didn't answer. I was already driving back to Maple Heights. When I turned onto the street, the house looked smaller, somehow shrunken by the truth. 2 government cars were parked outside their engines idling. Men in gray jackets stood under the porch light, papers in hand. Dad was at the doorway, pale and confused. Ryan paced behind him, phone in hand, voice cracking. They're saying we're under investigation. For what? One investigator flipped a folder open. Forged documents. Fraudulent loans. We need to speak with Vanessa Cole. Mom stood frozen in the hallway, her hand gripping the banister. She's not here, Dad muttered. His voice trembled on every syllable. I stayed back, half hidden by the fence. I didn't want to interfere. I wanted to watch them face it. The storm they'd invited finally at their door. A minute later, I saw Vanessa's car glide down the street, headlights cutting through the drizzle. She parked across from the house, unaware of the agents waiting inside. I stepped forward. Vanessa. Her head jerked up. She froze when she saw me, the calm mask slipping for the first time. "What's this about, Aaron?" she asked, her tone brittle. "You tell me," I said, voice steady. "The forged mortgage, the stolen funds, my license on your paperwork." Her jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," I said quietly. "You used my family to fund your scam. You played them and me, but the game's over." Her eyes darted toward the porch, where agents were now stepping outside. The panic in her face lasted a heartbeat before she sneered. "They trusted me," she snapped. "That's on them." I pressed the record button on my phone just long enough to catch every word. Within minutes, the agents surrounded her car. She didn't fight. She didn't even speak. Just folded her arms and watched the world she'd built start to rot. Ryan stumbled out, eyes wide. "She's lying. Tell them she's lying," he shouted at Dad, but Dad said nothing. The papers in his hand trembled like a confession. Mom clung to the doorway, whispering prayers that sounded more like apologies. When the cars pulled away, the house went silent. Only the rain made a sound. A knock came on my door that night, hesitant, desperate. I opened it to find Dad standing there, rain dripping from his coat. His voice was raw. "We're losing everything, Aaron. The bank's calling in the loan. Please, help us." I didn't move. Instead, I slid a folder across the table toward him. Inside my affidavit, the evidence of their signatures, the confession. Proof that I was clean. "I did help," I said, my voice calm. "I told the truth." He stared at me, mouth open, as I closed the door. Outside, the rain poured harder, washing the street clean. For the first time, I didn't feel responsible for saving what was broken. I felt free. 6 months later, the air in my new office smelled like cedar and sunlit paper. The walls were still bare, unfinished, honest, waiting for stories that hadn't been built yet. On the table lay a set of blueprints stamped with a new name, Haven Collab. A non-profit studio for women rebuilding after sabotage, financial, professional, or familial. Sophia sat across from me, tapping her pen against her mug. "You realize this is exactly what you needed back then," she said. I smiled. "Yeah. I guess I built the thing I couldn't find." We'd just finalized our first project, a housing redesign for single mothers evicted after fraudulent loans. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same system that nearly destroyed me had become the framework I used to help others stand again. Sunlight spilled over the plans, glinting off the edges like forgiveness. I opened my laptop and scrolled through old spreadsheets, years of numbers that once defined my worth. Mortgages, repairs, balances. Each line was a scar in data form. I hovered over delete. For a second, I almost hesitated. Then I clicked. The screen went white. No balance left to carry. I leaned back, exhaling for what felt like the first real breath in years. The quiet wasn't emptiness anymore. It was peace built on boundaries instead of fear. Later that night, I wrote something simple. Part reminder, part offering. To everyone who's been the backbone, the fixer, the quiet one who stayed too long, choosing yourself isn't cruelty. It's survival. You're not abandoning them. You're coming home to you. Sophia read it over my shoulder and smiled. "That's your closing line," she said. "For the video, for everything." I nodded. "Yeah, it's time to tell people the truth." If you've ever had to walk away to save yourself, share your story in the comments. Someone out there might need your courage tonight.